Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Hi there, welcome back to our series on themes of parent and adult children estrangement. Today's topic is on narcissism and emotional immaturity. Before we get started, let's go over our quotes. The first is, "A traumatized heart is not an open heart," and that is by Tina Gilbertson. And the second is, "Empathy is a social and emotional skill that helps us feel and understand the emotions, circumstances, intentions, thoughts, and needs of others such that we can offer sensitive, perceptive, and appropriate communication and support." And that is by Carla McLaren out of her book, The Language of Emotions. On to today's episode. Today's episode on narcissism and emotional immaturity was one that I struggled with when it came to actually recording this episode. And that's because I think that the word narcissism, the diagnosis narcissistic personality disorder, etc., is highly overused. And it oftentimes can, depending on the context in which it's used, can put up walls and bring out defenses of people. And so I struggled with that. However, this, along with emotional immaturity, seemed to be, again, a theme of parent and adult child estrangements. So I wanted to dive in a little bit more and talk about what is narcissism, give a couple of different definitions of that hopefully can spark some curiosity and help us to lower the walls of defense, and so we can learn about something from a broader perspective. So, the typical definition of narcissism is selfishness, involving a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, and a need for admiration, and in context of defining or characterizing a personality trait. While that's true, I'd like to offer another definition, and this one is by Brene Brown. And when I first heard her say this, I thought, yes, finally, someone who's getting beneath the surface. And when I say beneath the surface, what is causing this? What is causing the narcissistic traits? What's causing someone to behave and do the things that they do or not do the things they don't do? Brene Brown says that narcissism is a shame-based fear of being ordinary. There's little self-esteem and self-love, and instead it hides a lingering sense of feeling inferior and shameful, and the sufferers must compensate for that feeling of being inferior and the sense of feeling of shame. They must compensate for that at all cost via grandiosity. Narcissists need, so to speak, to revert to their golden suit of armor to camouflage the feelings of insignificance inside them. Now, when I am saying this, I recognize that there are people who have been deeply hurt, traumatized by narcissistic personality, folks with narcissistic personality disorders, and or those who just demonstrate narcissistic traits. And there's a difference, right? There's a difference between someone who has that diagnosis and those people that have NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, are few and far between. There are, however, many who demonstrate narcissistic traits. And I'm speaking more so about those people today. And so if we look at this, if we look at the shame, Brené's definition, shame-based fear of being ordinary. Well, where did that shame come from, right? If we get to the root of it, we tend to find that a lot of people have been so traumatized as children that it develops into these narcissistic traits. Now, by definition, children are narcissistic. It's all about them, nobody else, right? Very young children are narcissistic by the sheer fact that they're children, right? However, when we've experienced such shame in our life from those who were meant to protect us and hold us safe and those types of things, this is one result that can happen to a human being, is that they then begin to demonstrate narcissistic traits. So while the, studies can have all sorts of different things, genetics and that type of thing, I tend to lean more towards the childhood experiences and psychological factors, risk factors of judgment by parents, trauma and abuse, that type of thing. So then we move on to emotional immaturity. Definition of that is really a person's inability to regulate their emotions in an age-appropriate way. People who are emotionally immature tend to overreact to situations and have trouble controlling their emotions. They're also not able to really sit within conflict and work that out either. And again, if we come back to reasons why, research isn't exactly clear on the cause, but they say one factor is a strong association between being mistreated or abused as a child and the inability to develop parts of the brain. So I want to pause here for just a second. If we look at the older generations, boomers and some Gen X parents, they were raised in a time when there was significant abuse, across many of their families, the family systems. Most of them, and the moms that I've worked with, come from families with alcoholics, one parent not being present, in an age of children should be seen and not heard, do as I say, don't question authority, don't question the teachers, don't question the preacher, don't question the parents, don't question anyone, right? How are people supposed to learn if they can't ask questions? If they have a sense of curiosity, as all children do, and whenever they ask a question, they're shut down. right? Children don't have the ability to say, I have a question about this, and mom says, not right now, I don't have time for this, or I've got other things to do. The child doesn't have the emotional maturity to say, okay, when you do have time, could we circle back around to this and talk about this? I'm going to honor your space for now, and when you feel that you're more ready, then we can perhaps come back to the table and talk. Kids don't have that ability, so what do? They just shut down. And what I see oftentimes with my clients as estranged moms is this lack of curiosity and a lack of being able to consider other things than what is going on in their mind. And I attribute that back again to a lack of curiosity that stems from having been told most of their life as children and young adults, their curiosity was not welcomed. Okay? It's just, I see it so often across the board. It's heartbreaking. I understand it from the adult child's perspective, and having folks that are not emotionally mature available to me, and I understand it from, and how hurtful that is. I also understand as a coach that most parents were taught this. Not taught emotional immaturity, but taught that they were not allowed to mature in ways that they should have been, right? That come from a sense of curiosity and questioning and learning and growing and exploring and those types of things. Okay, that being said, so let's explore some traits of narcissistic traits and emotional immaturity. For narcissistic traits, we have grandiosity, that exaggerated sense of self-importance and superiority, a belief that I'm unique and special and deserving of special treatment. And if we look at that tends to come, I see the adult children talking about that with their parents, and especially on the realm of being a grandparent, that that grandparents feel they have this, they're deserving of this special treatment, right? Regardless of anything else, but just because of the title that they carry. Another trait is lack of empathy, and this happens to be a hallmark trait. A struggle to understand or even relate to the emotions and experiences of others. It's dismissive, invalidates at every turn the other person's feelings. To invalidate others is a huge piece of this as well, although that can also come from emotional immaturity. Prioritizing own needs above and desires above anyone else, and demonstrating a callous disregard for the well-being of others. And I know that sometimes that feeling of disregard can come from us when and it absolutely feels that way. Again, if we look at the reasons and causes for narcissistic traits to appear, it's someone who's deeply, deeply wounded, right? So another trait is a sense of entitlement, an expectation that others cater to demands, become resentful or outraged when their expectations are not met. So is it an expectation? Is it a desire that a need be met? Those types of things I think are interesting questions to ask. There's also manipulation, which is gaslighting is a big one there. guilt tripping, emotional blackmail, playing the victim, and I hear this a lot again in from estranged adult children about their parents, and within the estrangement community by and large. Superficial relationships, and those relationships are transactional, right? When there's not a depth to them, there's not a deepening with authenticity and vulnerability and things like that. It becomes very transactional. And fragile self-esteem and exploitation of others. So a fragile self-esteem can be someone who reacts defensively or aggressively without, again, sitting down and trying to talk and walk through things. So emotional immaturity is, the thing that I see the most is a lack of accountability, right? And this is what the adult children talk about all the time, is that my parents won't take accountability for the ways in which they hurt me. So some of those traits are difficulty regulating emotions. So they might be, I know this was me as a young parent, and not just as a young parent, but as a mature parent of teens and young adults for a long time. Would fly off the handle at the least little thing, or, sobbing all the time, like wild swings with emotions. So, and that happens to be generally from an unregulated nervous system. And that comes from trauma, oftentimes from trauma. Impulsivity, just knee-jerk reactions without doing what I call practicing the pause. We talked about a lack of accountability, difficulty in handling stress and adversity, and that oftentimes comes from when the person feels a sense of overwhelm, or they will be avoidant, right? So they're not able to handle those stressors and adversities in life in meaningful and healthy ways. They avoid, they go into overwhelm, which then leads to difficulty regulating emotions, and then we're on the vicious merry-go-round again. Limited self-awareness and insight, very little ability to look within. Had a conversation with a therapist the other day about this, and it was interesting because she said at every I will quote her, at every step and turn in any relationship, the work and practice is to ask ourselves, what is mine in this? What did I contribute? What don't I want to look at? And then she followed that with, it's not easy, it's not pretty, and yet it's essential if we want to shift the barriers. So folks who are emotionally immature are not able to do this, right? That turning within. This is where we see parents saying, I don't know anything. They won't tell me what I need to know. They've chose this. They are insisting on this. They're the ones who don't want to work this out because they won't sit down and talk to me. They, and pointing the finger without an ability to turn and look within. What parts do I own in this, right? Because if you're in a relationship takes two people. And so if you're in a relationship, most folks play a part within that relationship. And it's hard to look at that, right? And parents need to do this, I feel like, more so than children, because we are the parents and we're meant to lead the way. Then that follows dependency on others for validation. And I see this come from a fear of rejection or disapproval, which could then lead to abandonment, right? So they will look for that, am I doing it right? Like I had someone ask me the other day, or talk to me the other day about a parent who, always says, I'm a good parent, right? I was a good parent, right? Seeking that validation. A tendency towards avoidance or escapism, and instead of confronting things head on. Now, I want to say with this, that doesn't always mean that the person, and with a lot of these traits, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone is just absolutely, automatically emotionally immature or narcissistic. If we look at a tendency to towards avoidance or escapism, I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that in the gaming community, right? Where folks will just numb out. So in the addiction communities, I'm going to avoid the feelings and, the looking within. And so I'm going to escape. I'm going to drink. I'm going to gamble. I'm going to go shopping. I'm going to do all the things instead of sitting quietly with myself and looking within. So that can come from an unregulated nervous system and just an inability to, and a fear of looking within and what may be found there. And there's, insecurity is another emotional immaturity trait as well. So how does all of this impact the family dynamics, right? Well, there's emotional manipulation. For instance, a narcissistic parent may guilt trip their child into fulfilling their expectations or catering to their emotional needs. Some of the phrases would be, if you loved me, you would. Or, and I hear this a lot from the kids, you owe me for everything I've done for you. And that manipulation creates a sense of obligation and guilt, making it difficult for the adult child to assert their own autonomy or boundaries. Then there's gaslighting. Again, a narcissistic parent may gaslight and deny that past experiences or events happened, blaming the other person for problems within the relationship. And this manipulation, it's devastating. It leaves somebody really questioning their sanity. I've dealt with this on a personal and professional levels. And when you leave the communication with the interaction with that person and you're like, am I losing my mind? Like, am I losing it? When you're questioning that, you've probably been gaslit in some form or fashion. And then in the context of estranged parents and adult children, there's an undermining of autonomy, right? By constantly criticizing decisions, belittling accomplishments, micromanaging, can we say the manager versus the consultant role for their life choices. This type of behavior communicates to the adult child there's a lack of trust and respect for their autonomy, and that leads the adult child to feelings of frustration, resentment, and low self-esteem. I wanted to give an example of criticizing decisions. It doesn't always come across as, you're an idiot if you choose to do that, or, something that's so blatantly obvious, right? It's not always that. It's, I was watching like House Hunters or whatever the new show is called on HGTV the other day. And this mom went with her 28-year-old daughter, who is an ICU nurse, to buy her first home. And the mother, every time the daughter said something about, well, I'm looking for this in a house and I want it to have that and those types of things, every single thing she said, the mother said, well, I don't think that's what you need to do. No, what you need is those types of things. Every single thing this 28-year-old grown woman wanted in her home that she was purchasing on her own, this mother was criticizing. And you could see the entire body language of the daughter change every time her mother opened her mouth. Now, I know as a mom that this mother was trying to be helpful and trying to, because she's got 20, 30 years of, 40 years of life experience on her daughter, and she's been through a few things, and she probably knows a few things. But this leaves the daughter feeling like, my God, I can't want anything. I can't make a decision that is right. I can't do this, that, and the other thing. And then we expect her to walk into the ICU department as a nurse and be able to take control of a situation and handle emergencies and not second guess herself. You see where this comes into play? It really wreaks havoc on the lives of our kids. And I just want to say, as a parent, if you are a boomer or Gen X parent, I mean, I get it. You experience this too. So, see how generations repeat? If we stop and look at ourselves and what our childhood was like, our young adulthood was like, did we experience a lot of these things from our parents? It was just that it was societally, culturally expected that we not question it. That we just get along for the sake of getting along. So we learn to squash all of those things that are important to a human being. So I hope that you can find something deeper within today's episode than just, my mom or dad or my son or daughter or my daughter-in-law or son-in-law is narcissistic, or slapping these labels on people. If we can look beneath the surface, it doesn't excuse the behavior, but when we can understand the motivating factors that are oftentimes unconsciously motivating, it tends to take the charge out of things for us and begins to build some compassion and empathy, which can then help us to sort through some feelings without the hard lines, without the walls for boundaries. We can instead have fences that aren't private 6-foot, 8-foot privacy fences, but just like a chain link fence that says, here are my boundaries, here's what I need for me, but I'm not going to crucify you. I'm not going to drag you through the mud. I'm not going to sling mud. I'm not going to do all those things to further injure another person. And instead, I'm going to hold steadfast to my boundaries and hold compassion for the other person. So on that note, I think I'll leave it here for today. If you're navigating estrangement or reconciliation, or perhaps a second estrangement, and feel that support could help you to sort through your thoughts and emotions, feelings, and would like to gain tools to help you to heal your heart, please reach out for coaching. I can be reached at TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com. Again, TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com. Until next time. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, TheEstrangedHeart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.